Alright, hello everybody, my name is Aman, and today I'm here to talk to you about my AP research project on brain scans, AI, and education. So the specific question that I'm going to be answering today is, to what extent can EEG and machine learning be used to predict the interest level of a given student? And EEG is just a brain scanning technique. But don't worry, we're going to get more into what everything in this means in just a second. So first, I'd like to talk to you about how I generally arrived at these sort of subjects that I'm studying. So in grade 11 AP seminar, the two most important presentations for me, the two most important research projects, were the one that I did on the efficacy of modern Western education and the one I did on the future of medicine itself. And so in the education topic, I was looking through the technological lens, and what I found was that it seemed like we're going to have a lot of automation in the classroom. And this is because in the future it seems like machines are going to be able to learn how our kids learn even better than we can. It's kind of an interesting concept. And the same thing I found out in my research into the future of medicine. So it seems like we're going to have a lot of machine learning and a lot of AI in the medical field, because these machines can actually do these procedures and read these scans better than human doctors, and that's what the sort of future holds in these areas. As well, I did a bunch of reading into brain-computer interfaces and the I/O problem, it's called. So basically, the rate at which a computer can output information to us, it has been pretty much fixed for quite a while. So we can read information off a screen, and that's pretty close to the rate at which we can actually internalize information naturally. But the rate at which we can input information into a computer has had a bit more of a varied path, and it's quite a bit slower in general than we're actually capable. So in the beginning, we had to rewire a computer every time we wanted to input information. Then we got simple buttons, then keyboards, then mice, then smartphones. However, throughout this process, the maximum number of words per minute that we can enter into a computer has remained about 200 if you're using a good speech recognition software, and around 150 if you're a really fast typer. And so what it looks like is we're going to have some sort of technology in our brains in the future that's actually going to allow us to communicate with computers even better than we can now. And so that sort of got me interested in brain scanning and interpreting those scans. So in October, my ideas surrounding my topic included the following. So I thought, okay, AI is pretty interesting. I did those research topics last year, and I researched it on my own over the summer. Science, I've always liked science, like physics, biology, chemistry, always been some of my favorite subjects. And medicine has always been pretty fascinating to me. Both my parents are doctors, and it's just a pretty fascinating field. Mathematics and computer science, also pretty interesting. I've always liked computer programming and stuff like that. Education, I am a student, so I'm invested in that whole system. And finally, psychology is a pretty interesting subject as well. And so instead of just choosing one of these, I combine them all into my research question. So EEG is a medical technique that has a lot of scientific basis. So it has all sorts of chemistry and physics going on when it comes to how ions are moving around. And the machine learning aspect obviously has to do with AI, and it has to do with math and computer science, since these machine learning algorithms are pretty much just pretty complicated math formula that you're applying to your data sets. And finally, interest level is both educationally and psychologically very relevant. And so when I decided on this topic, the method that I chose was a mixed qualitative and quantitative correlational experiment. So what that means is that I'm going to conduct my experiment. This is when I'm going to collect my qualitative and quantitative data. So I'll be asking people qualitatively how interesting something was that I had them do. As well, I would be gathering quantitative data in the form of the EEG scan with the brain scanning headset, and that's quantitative information. And then I would attempt to find a correlation between those two using machine learning algorithms. So that's the general layout of the study. So just to clarify the goal of my research, my goal is to make an AI. This is going to be my AI. And my goal is for it to be able to accept brain scan data as input and then tell me as accurately as possible whether or not the person whose brain scan data it is was interested in whatever they were doing. So that's my goal, and I want it to be as right as much of the time as possible. And so just in terms of the science behind these two sort of subtopics, EEG and machine learning, EEG, the brain scanning technique, stands for electroencephalography, And if we translate it from Greek, electroencephalography translates to electricity brain describing. So we're describing the electrical impulses going on in the brain. And how that works is your neurons are sending these signals around using ions, they're charged particles, so that's pretty much electricity. And that electricity you can actually measure and detect through the scalp using these electrodes. And that's how it goes from the neurons to the electrical impulses to the scalp, and then finally, using the headset, you get to this graph over here. And that's what I'm actually analyzing in my research. And machine learning is simply whenever a computer program or an algorithm gets better at a certain task, the more experience it has at that task. So if I had an algorithm that was trying to calculate the housing price of a property or something based on the number of square feet in the house, and it got better at that task, it got more accurate the more information I gave it, then you would say that that is a learning algorithm. And so these pictures, that one over there is an example of a neural network. It's a very famous machine learning algorithm. This one right here is a support vector machine. It's a little less well known, but it's kind of like the workhorse when it comes to this area of research. And these two bottom screenshots are just screenshots from homework assignments I did for an online course over the summer in machine learning. And so in terms of the surrounding literature, I went through a whole bunch of papers when I was trying to create my experiment and get a sort of background on it. However, the two most pertinent ones and the two that sort of show what I found from the literature to be the best were these two. So the first one was all about using EEG and machine learning to predict subsequent memory, and it was by No et al. So basically, what they were trying to do was to make an algorithm that could look at EEG scan data from when someone was trying to memorize something. So let's say a sequence of letters or numbers. So you take the EEG scan, and they were trying to make a machine learning algorithm that could, based on that EEG data, predict how well that person would do on a memory test. So basically predict how well they would remember that thing they were trying to memorize. And so in the end, they were able to get a 60% accuracy. And while that may not sound like very much, it's actually quite significant because that shows that there's some sort of signal in the EEG data that they had found. And it shows that there is something to be found in that data. And so that would be considered a successful study in this case because it proves it correct that it is possible to predict subsequent memory using EEG and machine learning. And the second paper that was pertinent is one that took it a step further. So this one tried to use EEG and machine learning to make a computer program that would optimize a lesson plan for teaching people math using the EEG scan data. And so the important numbers from here are the 3.54 and the 3.45. So in the EEG-based learning environment, where they were using the EEG and machine learning to try to optimize the lesson plan, the mean improvement from before and after on the math tests is 3.54. So that's how much they improved. Meanwhile, on the control group, where they were just using a normal computer program to teach them the mathematics, the mean improvement was only 3.45. So that shows that using the EEG scanner and using the machine learning algorithms, they were in fact able to make their lesson plans just a little bit better for those people so they could do better on the tests afterwards. So in terms of the conclusions, my literature review showed me that A, there is a strong possibility that I'd be able to make a classifier, that I'd be able to make this algorithm to determine the interest level of a student based on their EEG. As well, it gave me the sort of understanding of the layout of this type of study, which was super helpful when I was trying to craft and conduct my experiment. So when it came to this step, the first thing that I needed to do was to order an EEG scanner because you can't really do much research without having an EEG scanner. So according to a paper by Masakalunas et al., the best EEG scanners for the price range that I was looking at came from Emotive. It's a company that makes EEG scanners. And so I bought the Emotive Epoch Plus, and that's the one that I settled on. And so after that, the next step was just to learn how to use the thing, which is a task in and of itself. But after I'd done that, I needed to select my educational tasks. So while I had the EEG headset on everyone's head, I needed something for them to do. I couldn't just ask you, oh, generally how interested are you right now? Like that doesn't really make sense. Like how are you supposed to know? So I decided, since I was talking about students, to give them educational articles. So the first one I thought would be pretty interesting for everyone. It's from a book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And basically it's all about how the greats become the greats in given fields. Anyway, pretty fascinating stuff. And the other one that I decided on was from a biography by Benjamin Franklin, or of Benjamin Franklin. And I thought that, okay, some people would find this interesting, some people wouldn't. And so that's sort of a 50-50 split task. And the last one was just the straight Wikipedia article on mathematics itself, which is, I don't know if you've read it, but it's quite boring, especially if you don't really have a background in like high-level mathematics. So those were my educational tasks, and then after I selected those, I had to attain permission. So I had my IRB application approved by the IRB at my school, so I brought it to Mr. Healy, that's the guy up there, and I had my consent form approved by a doctor who uses EEG in their practice. And so after that, I selected my participants, I sent out an email to the entire school, and I made an announcement. Fortunately, I got a lot more people willing to participate in the study than I actually had time for. So I ended up trimming the number of people down to only about 10 and diversifying them among the grades and the genders, just so that I had a representative data set of students. Then I just had to conduct my experiment, so I put the EEG headset on all of these people's head and just had them read out these articles and tell me how interesting they were, and that's what formed my data set. Now, step 6 was to pre-process the data. So when the EEG scan comes out, this is what it looks like. It's very information dense. You have 10 electrodes sampling the voltage every 1/28th of a second. So it's a whole bunch of information, especially for like a 15-minute scan. So I had to somehow boil it down to these nice numbers that I could just input into a machine learning algorithm. And the method that I used was called a Fourier transform. Now, it's rather difficult to understand. Usually you'd learn this in around 3rd year of engineering, I think. But in any case, it basically is a very good method to boil down a time-bound data set. So in this case, you had the EEG readings at every like 1/28th of a second. It's a good way to boil that down into a smaller set of information that still contains the gist of the information, sort of. So that's what the Fourier transform was for. So once I'd done that, I just had to select and train my machine learning algorithm. So I decided to use the Azure Machine Learning suite by Microsoft. And the reason that I chose this was because A, it's free, so I didn't have to pay for it. And although I could like hard code them myself, that would be kind of a waste of time because this is just available online and it's very easy to use and it's very reliable. And so I decided on that, and then I decided on 4 of these machine learning algorithms. So the first one up here is a logistic regression algorithm. That one's called a support vector machine. We saw a bit of that earlier. This one is another artificial neural network, and that one is a decision forest. Now, unfortunately, I don't have time enough to explain exactly how these work. They all deserve their own like hour-long talks because they're kind of hard to wrap your head around. But anyway, the reason that I chose them was because they're quite prevalent in surrounding literature, and they're good for analyzing this type of data. So the way that my algorithm training would work is basically I take the algorithm and I show it, I input the interest level and the brain scan data for a bunch of people. So I say, okay, here's a guy who's super interested, this is what his brain scan data looks like. Here's a gal who's not very interested, this is what her brain scan data looks like. And it tries to learn the connection between those two, and it tries to make a generalization between the two. And something that's special about this is that humans are not actually capable of doing this fine analysis on EEG scans. So it's actually something that is only possible with the use of these algorithms. In any case, the goal is that I'll just be able to input the brain scan data and have the EEG algorithm say whether or not the person was interested without me telling it. And so that was the whole goal of the training process. And so after I had done that with all 4 of my algorithms, these are the end accuracies. And so the highest accuracy that I achieved was with the support vector machine, the SVM, at exactly 70%. And the other algorithms followed in the high 60%. And so what this shows about my question, so to answer my question, the answer is to a great extent. So to what extent can EEG and machine learning be used to predict the interest level of a given student? Well, clearly, since I was able to make this AI that was able to actually say with 70% accuracy the interest level, it is to a great extent. You can actually do this. And so some of the implications of this research, there are a lot of them that you can choose from. One of them is that there's a strong possibility that we could use this as an educational tool for human teachers. So unlike that study that I showed before, which was a totally automated learning environment, human teachers could actually use this as a relevant metric when they're trying to, sort of teach a student in the best way possible to optimize their lesson plans. As well, it shows that there is a rather bright future for brain-computer interfaces, since interest is a pretty difficult thing to define for people. But this algorithm was able to get a 70% accuracy rate, even with the somewhat cheap EEG scanner that I was using compared to like hospital-grade EEG scanners. And in terms of limitations, unfortunately, the Azure Machine Learning software suite doesn't let you actually see the inner workings of the algorithm. So basically, the algorithms have these hyperparameters that it's basically hiding from me, and those are the things that it is optimizing for the data set. So I can't actually see that using Azure Machine Learning. So that is one drawback, so I can't see what was the most important part of the EEG scan when it came to deciding the interest level. As well, the way in which I boil down the data using that Fourier transform, there are a lot of other methods of analyzing these time-bound data sets, and I would have liked to experiment a bit more with some of the other ones, but I do stand by that choice to use the Fourier transform since it was pretty prevalent in the research. And finally, just in terms of the tasks that I used, I think that it would have been nice to have some tasks other than just reading. So having people maybe have a lesson from a human person, or having people watch educational videos as well, since I'm just trying to look at a student's level of interest. And yeah, that has been my presentation on brain scans, AI, and education, and here are my references.
Thank you, Aman. After you chose your research question, which information specifically guided your choice of a research method?
So I'd say that reading through the methods section of those two papers that I talked about in the presentation were some of the most important parts. I had taken a course in machine learning over the summer that sort of described the general gist of how sort of experiments in machine learning are laid out. So that's another factor that really helped me narrow down how exactly I was going to research this question.
Aman, what criteria did you use to discriminate among perspectives in order to reach your conclusion?
So when it came to differing perspectives in this sort of branch of science, it seems like most people just publish their positive results. So if someone makes a machine learning classifier that can do something, they will publish it. But if they make something that doesn't really work out that well, they tend to not publish it. So in terms of the information that was sort of online in these journals, it was mostly all in agreement that yes, there's a strong possibility that that I would be able to make this classifier. However, when I would just casually talk to people who were in the field, they would say, oh, the data set, it's far too noisy, or they'd say that it's too much of a complicated thing to do. And the way that I sort of dealt with that is I would say, okay, I seem to have this evidence from other papers that says that I can do it, while other people are saying that I can't. And science is all about seeing who's right and who's wrong. So I decided to push forth and just see if I could do it, and fortunately it worked out however it worked out.
Well, think about the initial curiosity that led to your inquiry. What other areas of inquiry might that same curiosity lead to?
So as we saw in that mind map slide, there were a lot of different sort of subtopics and sort of areas of academic exploration that are associated with this. So like whether it's medicine or psychology or like computer programming, obviously, and AI, there are a lot of things that I was curious about that led me to pursue this. So I'd say that finding better ways to process this data, that would certainly be another way that I could have gone with this study. As well, looking more deeply into the machine learning algorithms themselves and trying to make better versions of those is definitely another way that the research could have gone. And yeah, there are definitely a whole bunch of ways in medicine, education, psychology, and computer science that this research could have gone.
1831.